I paid for peace and got chaos. I didn't lose everything at once. I lost it slowly, one act of love at a time. I thought peace could be purchased, not with objects or vacations, not with fleeting luxuries, but with devotion, patience, and sacrifice. I believed that if I gave enough of myself, enough trust, enough love, enough financial security, the storm of life would calm around me. That calm, I imagined, would feel like safety, like finally being allowed to rest. But what I discovered was that peace, when bought with hope instead of wisdom, comes at a price far greater than money. It comes at the cost of self, of dignity, of quiet, unshakable certainty. I was 60 then, and still restless. I had spent decades carefully tending my life, working, saving, planning, nothing extravagant, nothing reckless. A small home, modest retirement, an existence carefully designed to be comfortable, predictable, and calm. And yet the yearning for companionship, for intimacy, for the warmth of shared vulnerability pulled me toward someone who wore charm like armor and confidence like currency. He entered my life quietly, almost casually, yet left footprints deep enough to mark every corner of my mind. He appeared at a time when both of us carried invisible wounds from failed marriages, quiet sorrows that shaped our nights and our days. His presence felt like a balm at first, a rare form of relief that whispered, "Here is someone who understands you, someone who will never demand too much, someone you can trust." Trust, that word would later become the heaviest of chains. At first, it was a small request, helping fund a modest business plan, a consulting firm he claimed would flourish with the right investment. The figures seemed reasonable at first, almost insignificant against the backdrop of my life savings. $5,000, then $10,000, then 1 month's salary. Transfers marked with hopeful annotations in my banking app. Our new future, our shared dream. Each transaction felt like planting a seed in fertile soil, an investment not only in him, but in the idea of us, the belief that two people together could rise from their pasts and create something meaningful. I never realized that the soil was barren. Slowly, subtly, the nature of our relationship began to shift. At first, it was invisible, like smoke curling unnoticed in the corner of a room. I covered small expenses, groceries, utilities, gas, small sacrifices I told myself were part of partnership. I convinced myself it was generosity, not enabling. And yet, each time I opened my bank statements, a quiet, uneasy tension coiled in my stomach. The numbers climbed, almost imperceptibly, until the total no longer resembled investment. It resembled surrender. By the time I discovered that $94,000 had vanished over 2 years, it was too late to track the precise moment my life began unraveling. It had been a slow theft, orchestrated by someone I thought was a partner, carried out in installments of trust and hope. No alarms had sounded, no warning lights had blinked, only the creeping realization that my future, once secure and serene, had been quietly appropriated by another's desires. And yet, it wasn't just money that was lost. It was my sense of equilibrium, the hard-won serenity of a life lived cautiously. The quiet evenings I once treasured, the simple routines of coffee on the porch, of reading without distraction, of living within my means, all of it had become permeated with anxiety, dread, and uncertainty. What had once been peace had mutated into chaos. He did not confront me with accusations or denials. There was no theatrical revelation. There was only absence. Absence of honesty, absence of remorse, absence of the shared vision he had promised. The business, he claimed, was thriving, but all evidence suggested otherwise. Websites disappeared, contact numbers disconnected. The few tangible remnants of ambition evaporated as if they had never existed. Meanwhile, he moved through life with the ease of someone unburdened, the luxury of freedom financed by the trust and hope of another. It was during one late evening, sitting alone in the dim light of my kitchen, that the magnitude of the betrayal truly registered. The room was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Yet within that silence, the weight of my choices pressed down with unbearable intensity. Not anger, not tears, just emptiness. The body can endure heartbreak, can endure shock, but the soul, I realized, can quietly hollow out without fanfare, leaving behind a shell that moves through life while the interior is fractured and desolate. The chaos he brought into my life was not explosive, it was insidious. It did not arrive with screams or confrontations, but with subtle erosion of my resources, of my confidence, of my sense of security. Each unfulfilled promise, each manipulated reassurance, each carefully constructed half-truth chipped away at the foundation of a life I had built with care. I paid for peace, and instead, I inherited instability. I paid for trust, and instead, I received deception. The bitter irony, the cruel lesson, is that peace is never purchased with the labor of the heart alone. True serenity is earned through balance, through vigilance, through choosing with clarity whom to entrust with not only our wealth, but our inner landscapes. My error was in conflating hope with security, in believing that devotion could substitute for discernment. I had cultivated trust like a garden, only to find that it had been overrun by weeds, the roots of manipulation entwined with the stems of my generosity. I am older now. The memory of that period feels like standing at the edge of a storm I thought I could navigate. I remember the numbness, the silence, the quiet reckoning as I realized the chaos had been my companion for far longer than the peace had ever been. I paid for peace, and in return, I received lessons wrapped in grief, humility, and a profound understanding of human complexity. Even now, I feel the shadow of that time when I allow myself to reflect. It is a shadow I do not resent, for it taught me the critical distinction between love and obligation, between giving and surrendering, between partnership and exploitation. What I lost was measurable in dollars, but what I gained, painful though it was the clarity that comes only when one has been stripped bare. I paid for peace and got chaos. And in that chaos, in the quiet devastation of my own expectations, I began the slow, deliberate process of reclaiming my life. Not with money, not with external validation, but with the hard, deliberate work of knowing myself, setting boundaries, and understanding that serenity is never a commodity, never a gift from another, but something cultivated in the interior landscape of the soul. The chaos I had paid for did not arrive in a single thunderclap. It unfolded quietly, like a slow leak in a dam, until the foundation of everything I had known began to crumble. At first, I tried to rationalize. Perhaps the business truly was struggling. Perhaps his distractions were temporary, trivial. I clung to hope as if it were a life raft. Though with every passing day, the currents of reality tugged harder, pulling me toward the jagged rocks of truth. The first real awakening was subtle. Bills that had once been shared were now quietly mine alone. Credit card statements appeared without explanation, withdrawals larger than necessary, transfers unrecorded. Each time I noticed, I attempted to suppress the pang of doubt. But doubts, once planted, grow. They spread like roots through soil once thought firm, and soon I could no longer ignore the signs that had been there all along, masked by charm and carefully orchestrated smiles. I realized with a sinking clarity that I had been funding not a partnership, but a lifestyle built entirely on deception. The chaos was intentional, meticulously cultivated. Every request, every financial plea, every subtle, guilt-laden glance had been designed to extract more from me than I knew I could give. It was not about survival, not about shared ambition. It was about control, about leverage, about feeding a life at the expense of another. In that revelation, the emotional toll was immense. Anger rose, yes, but it was accompanied by something colder, sharper, a profound grief, a mourning for the self I had believed I could trust. It is a strange form of bereavement to lose not a person, but the version of yourself that trusted them completely, unconditionally, without question. I grieved for my own naivete, for the illusions I had nurtured, for the blind optimism that had allowed chaos to take root in the soil of my life. As the truth emerged, so did the realization that it was not only money that had been stolen. My sense of safety, my expectations of fairness and loyalty had been quietly dismantled. The life I had planned, carefully mapped, was no longer attainable in the way I had envisioned. The foundation beneath my feet had shifted imperceptibly until every step carried the threat of collapse. Sleep became uneasy. The evenings, once a refuge, now felt suffocating. My home, once a sanctuary, seemed to echo with absence, with the weight of what had been misplaced, what had been taken. And yet, the psychological manipulation ran deeper than financial exploitation. I began to notice patterns I had missed, signs that had been disguised as love, concern, or charm. Small contradictions, fleeting inconsistencies, the subtle erosion of my confidence whenever I questioned him, these were not accidents. They were the architecture of gaslighting, carefully engineered to leave me doubting myself even as my instincts screamed otherwise. I began to catalog moments I had dismissed, tiny shifts in tone, pauses that carried unspoken judgments, the soft, almost imperceptible indignation when I expressed concern. With every reflection, every late-night examination of the past, I saw the mosaic of deception clearly. It was intricate, almost beautiful in its precision. He had not relied solely on charm or trust. He had relied on the quiet submission of someone desperate for connection, someone willing to believe in the possibility of mutual growth, someone who had mistaken devotion for security. And I had supplied all of that willingly, unknowingly handing over both material and emotional currency. I remember a morning in late autumn when the full weight of it hit me. The trees outside my window were shedding leaves, each one a silent, delicate emblem of endings. I sat alone with a cup of coffee, the bitter warmth contrasting the chill that had settled deep within me. I could see the path of my life, the careful saving, the quiet planning, the hope that love could exist without cost, and recognize it as a path diverted, sabotaged, rerouted by someone I had allowed into the most sacred corners of my existence. Anger, when it arrived, was not cinematic or loud. It was a low-burning, unrelenting force. It was the heat of awareness, of recognition, of clarity at last. I understood that chaos had been my companion, my unintended partner in the illusion of peace. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it confirmed the depth of betrayal. Liberating because acknowledgement is the first step toward reclaiming control. The financial devastation was quantifiable, but the emotional cost was immeasurable. I had invested not only money, but trust, hope, and years of carefully cultivated patience. And in return, I received betrayal so thorough, so complete, that it reshaped the contours of my inner life. I could no longer approach relationships without caution. I could no longer offer trust without scrutiny. The lessons were brutal, but they were necessary. In the quiet aftermath, I began to reconstruct my understanding of myself and the world. I learned to separate guilt from responsibility, to distinguish between compassion and exploitation. I came to see that chaos cannot be tamed by payment or patience, that peace is not a commodity, and that the generosity of the heart can be weaponized by those skilled in its manipulation. I also learned that healing is not linear. It moves in waves, unpredictable in its course. There were days when I felt utterly undone, when the memory of his deception left me trembling, exhausted, haunted by a sense of profound loss. And there were days when clarity emerged, when the storm of realization subsided long enough for me to glimpse the potential for renewal. Each day was a negotiation between despair and determination, between the weight of past mistakes and the fragile hope of reclaiming autonomy. Through this period, I began to understand that my most valuable resource was no longer financial. It was discernment. It was the ability to observe, to recognize, to name what was occurring without succumbing to self-blame. I began to rebuild boundaries, to erect barriers against the subtle encroachments of those who would take without giving. I learned the painful but crucial truth that the heart, while capable of profound generosity, must also be protected with vigilance. Looking back, the chaos was inevitable. I had entered a transaction of trust without the armor of wisdom. I had believed in peace as a tangible reward rather than a state cultivated internally. And yet, in surviving it, in enduring the subtle violence of deception, I had gained something deeper: clarity, resilience, and the hard-won knowledge of my own worth. The chaos was a teacher, though its lessons were harsh. It revealed the limitations of hope when untempered by caution. It exposed the fragility of trust when placed in unworthy hands, and it illuminated the remarkable capacity of the human spirit to recover, to reconstruct, to rise from disillusionment, not merely intact, but transformed. I paid for peace, and chaos was all I received. Yet in the rawness of that realization, I began the slow, deliberate work of reclaiming my sense of self. I began to understand that serenity, the kind that endures, cannot be purchased from another. It can only be nurtured within. And in that understanding, I found the first glimmers of freedom, the first true steps toward the life I had once thought lost forever. The aftermath of betrayal is quiet at first, like the soft aftermath of a storm that leaves the sky bruised and the air heavy with tension. Chaos had left its mark in every corner of my life, not only in my finances, but in the deepest recesses of my mind. Sleep was tentative. Every decision felt weighted, as if the memory of past errors had left invisible chains around my instincts. Trust was no longer a simple, natural act. It had become a careful negotiation between hope and vigilance. I began to examine every facet of my life with a meticulous attention I had never known. The money I had given, the years I had invested emotionally, the devotion I had offered freely, all were now measured in lessons rather than losses. I sought counsel, legal advice, and financial guidance, not only to reclaim what could be salvaged, but to arm myself with clarity, to understand precisely how I had been deceived. The process was painstaking, slow, and often painful, but it became a necessary ritual of reclamation, a way to turn chaos into understanding. Rebuilding finances after betrayal is a peculiar endeavor. It is neither simple nor immediate. Each step toward security is accompanied by the haunting memory of past miscalculations. And yet, in methodical persistence, there is empowerment. Every careful transfer, every cautious investment, every decision made with full awareness became a symbolic act of reclaiming control. The chaos had stolen much, but it could not take my capacity for judgment, nor could it erase the resilience that had sustained me through years of subtle deception. Emotional recovery is slower, more intricate. The betrayal had fractured not only my trust in others, but in my own perception of the world. Every encounter carried echoes of past lessons, and every act of generosity was filtered through the memory of exploitation. I grieved not only for what was lost, but for the innocence of belief, the naive faith that peace could be bought, that hope could be measured in dollars or devotion. The mourning was long, quiet, and introspective. There were days when the weight of memory made movement difficult, when the recollection of each subtle manipulation pressed down like an unseen hand. Yet, even in the darkest moments, small flickers of clarity emerged. I realized that chaos had also revealed my strength. It forced me to confront my vulnerabilities, to examine the boundaries I had neglected, and to understand the ways in which compassion can be mistaken for acquiescence. I learned to recognize the difference between generosity and surrender, between devotion and exploitation, between love and manipulation. These distinctions, painfully etched into my consciousness, became the foundation for a reconstructed life built not on illusion, but on understanding. There was a strange freedom in acknowledging what I could not change. I could not retrieve all that had been lost, nor could I undo the decisions of the past, but I could reclaim the present, and with deliberate care, I could shape the future. I began to establish boundaries that were once foreign, to articulate needs that had been suppressed, and to observe interactions with a new clarity. Each small act of self-assertion, though seemingly ordinary, became a statement of autonomy, a reclamation of authority over my own life. In this phase of recovery, I confronted the most insidious form of betrayal, the erosion of self-worth. The chaos had not only stolen money, it had stolen confidence. It had replaced pride with self-doubt. It had whispered that my judgment was flawed, my discernment unreliable. Rebuilding self-worth required more than external validation. It required an intimate reckoning with my own value. I began to recognize that generosity and care are not weaknesses, that hope is not folly, and that the capacity to trust, though once exploited, is an inherent strength. The slow process of healing was accompanied by reflection. I revisited the past not with anger but with comprehension. I traced the subtle manipulations, the small deceptions, the careful orchestration of dependency, and in doing so, I understood that my suffering was neither shameful nor meaningless. It was a teacher, however ruthless, showing me the contours of human behavior and the limits of personal investment. Each memory, once a wound, transformed into insight. Each regret, once a weight, became a guidepost for future decisions. With time, I learned to embrace solitude without fear. I discovered that peace is not something given, nor something that can be purchased. It is cultivated within the self, nurtured by boundaries, reinforced by clarity, and protected by discernment. I found satisfaction in quiet routines, in the deliberate attention to small pleasures, in the steady reconstruction of a life grounded in awareness rather than expectation. The chaos had taught me that serenity is an internal state, impervious to the whims of others, and entirely dependent on one's own choices. Socially, I became more selective, not in bitterness but in wisdom. I observed the intentions of others with subtle discernment, evaluated relationships not by charm or sentiment, but by reliability, consistency, and integrity. I no longer allowed the allure of companionship to overshadow the necessity of personal safety and emotional health. Trust was still offered, but it was measured, deliberate, and informed by experience rather than hope alone. Emotionally, I reclaimed agency. I allowed myself to feel anger without guilt, disappointment without shame, sadness without self-blame. I learned that acknowledging emotions fully is not indulgence, but necessity. Through journals, reflection, and quiet contemplation, I articulated the nuances of my experience, translating pain into understanding, grief into strategy, and confusion into clarity. Each act of reflection reinforced my autonomy and fortified my resilience. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, peace began to return. Not the naive peace of dependence or hope in another's integrity, but the deliberate, self-generated peace of someone who has endured, observed, and reclaimed control. I found satisfaction in simple routines, in the predictable rhythms of daily life, in the deliberate acts of mindfulness that kept my internal world stable despite the unpredictability of the external. By the end of this journey, I understood the full lesson of the chaos I had endured. It had been expensive, not only financially, but emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically. Yet, in the very process of enduring it, I had discovered the core of my strength. I had learned that peace is not purchased, that trust is not naive when paired with discernment, and that hope is not folly when tempered with awareness. The man who had taken from me the chaos I had once feared had inadvertently provided the most profound gift, a mirror showing not what I lacked, but what I possessed, the clarity to recognize deception, the resilience to endure it, and the wisdom to rebuild not only a life, but a self that is informed, cautious, and unyieldingly authentic. I paid for peace and received chaos, but through chaos, I reclaimed myself. I learned that serenity is not the absence of disturbance, but the mastery of self, the deliberate cultivation of boundaries, and the acceptance that life's storms can be survived without surrendering the core of one's being. And in that reclamation, I found something far more enduring than what I had once sought in another: the unwavering strength of my own heart, the quiet certainty of my own judgment, and the profound, unshakable peace that comes only from within.